Welcome everyone to our final session of Love Data Week. Love Data Week is all about spreading awareness of the importance of research data management, sharing, preserving, and reusing data. And this week we've hosted a week of events, these webinars, where we've been touching on different resources and tips to help you at any stage of your career follow these good data practices. So let's jump into our final session where we will be talking about checklists for research data management. Just want to mention this session is being recorded and you'll receive a link to the recording and the slides later today. You are encouraged to ask questions throughout this session, so please enter those into the chat. Keep yourself muted unless you do want to ask a question. And then please be sure to fill out the survey that I'll provide at the end of today's session. So today we are exploring data management checklists as guides for this data lifecycle. And the resources we will explore today will actually touch on all of the topics that we have discussed throughout this entire Love Data Week. So hello everyone, I'm Julie Goldman, Research Data Services Librarian at Countway Library at Harvard Medical School. For Countway Library, I offer a lot of these types of research data management trainings. I am also available for consultations on identifying best practices, creating a data management plan, or if you're looking to find some data or publish data. I am also the co-chair of the Longwood Medical Area Research Data Management Working Group. And this working group includes many members of our research community who meet each month to talk about research data management. And also we've been working together on a lot of the resources and checklists that I will present today. So in this session, I will take some time to review some key data management practices. I'll point you to guides to help you efficiently manage research data and your projects. And then ultimately, all of the resources and the guides will increase your project productivity and allow you to delegate specific tasks in your projects. All of the concepts and resources we will discuss today can be found on our Biomedical Research Data Management website. And specifically, this page brings together many of our research data management resources. This is a really great place to start if you are looking for guidance on research data management. So first, let's talk about why checklists and why using these resources is important. So checklists are tools used to better organize your projects and to verify easily your most important tasks. They have been designed to reduce errors and ensure consistency and completeness in carrying out, tasks and activities. We are going to explore multiple checklists that will apply to different data management practices or topics. And yes, there are multiple. So these checklists, guides, steps, cheat sheets, whatever you want to call them, they are intended to help you get started integrating data management into your research practice. These resources can help you identify gaps and communicate elements of data management to members of your research team or your lab or your group. So it's recommended that you apply a selected checklist to an individual research project, as practices and procedures may vary considerably between projects. It's also likely that certain data management practices that are specific to your research, the types of data that you're working with, and your needs as a researcher are not covered in the checklist that I will show. It's also possible that certain items on the checklist will not apply to, those specific situations. And research data management exists along this continuum. So following best practices often involves adopting new guidance, new procedures, and new techniques as they are developed or you become aware of them. So it's worth revisiting these checklists periodically. Feel free, and I invite you to take any of these checklists or resources and adapt them to better fit your research needs. As an overview, I just want to touch on, what is data management? So we use this term to refer to the active and ongoing management of data. Managing data is about knowing who created it, why it was created, what it is, and where it is. Basically, can you or someone else find and use your data? And research data management happens throughout this life cycle of a research project. So here we see an image of, the life cycle stages from planning, collection, analysis, storage, evaluation, sharing, and reuse of research data. As we can see, there are many, stages and steps involved with research data management, and many of these concepts may be new to you. This brings us to our first checklist. So understanding these activities, services, and tools for managing data is very important. Therefore, we have created a cheat sheet for some of the main concepts throughout the life cycle to help clear up any misconceptions. This terminology guide is not comprehensive, but should provide you with a better understanding of some of the top terms throughout the research life cycle. You can also view a companion terminology list on our website. And as a note, as I show some of these checklists, you'll see a link to the Open Science Framework, this osf.io link. And most of the checklists are available on the Open Science Framework. And at the end of today's talk, I will show you how to find the entire collection. Let's focus on one important term of research data management, which is data. And the term research data can actually be difficult to define. Many different domains and researchers have different understandings of what is data. I tend to use this definition from Christine Boardman on the slide because I think it is broad enough to cover many disciplines like the sciences, social sciences, and humanities. The focus here is really on how data are used, particularly as evidence for the purposes of research and scholarship. It's important to think about how research takes, lots of different forms, and data can be encoded in lots of different kinds of formats. So our next guide looks at research data types. And this guide for data types, and formats can help you determine the type of data that you are working with and what management considerations you need to make for the long term. And the types, formats, and sizes of your data will determine a lot that goes into managing your data throughout a project. All right, so we have already seen an example, a simple example of a life cycle image. This image that we're looking at now kind of takes that to the next level. As I've mentioned, data management is the combination of a number of small practices that add up being able to find and use data when you need it. And there are many activities, resources, and entities that may be involved, depending on the type of research project and where the research is occurring. So this expanded view of the life cycle shows some of the additional practices you should implement throughout the stages of a project. So for example, in the collect and create stage, it's not just about collecting and creating data, right? It has to do with some practices for how you're collecting and creating that data. So you need to determine practices for organizing your files, how you're going to name those files, maintaining documentation, project version control. So you need to think about these kind of sub practices that add up to your data being usable. So this research data management lifecycle checklist mirrors the project, the data lifecycle, and also the website that we've set up. This will help you set up and maintain robust data management practices and systems throughout the full life of your project. And you may be thinking, this is the one checklist you need. And yes, this is a great overview of data management practices and steps that you definitely want to review for every project. However, this checklist does not cover every single aspect. As I will show, even these individual steps have their own processes and therefore checklists. Just think back to my example of file naming conventions. I have a checklist for how you go about creating those. And I want to stress a common kind of RDM mantra. Data management is incremental. So if you try to implement everything at once, you will get overwhelmed, frustrated, and lose focus on your project. So my advice to you is to identify one practice you can start with and implement that really well and build on from there. So don't try to tackle this checklist all in one day for a project. You will have to take it kind of step by step. All right, so let's dive in and actually go through this use this checklist as a guide for showing all of those steps and other checklists that can help you along the way. So first step in our life cycle is to plan and design our research data management approach. So here you'll want to, write a data management plan, define roles and responsibilities, onboard your team members, and choose documentation procedures. Here we are sure that we are maintaining documentation that describes, the types of data that we are collecting and working with over the course of our project, as well as details about, materials that you would be using, such as documentation and code. And specifically, your data management plan will help you maintain documentation that outlines the specific practices related to managing your data employed throughout the course of your project. So these will be documents about the file naming conventions, how you're backing up your data, keeping these all in a central location for the entire group and team to find and understand. If you joined us on Wednesday, we talked about data management plans and the DMP tool. So an additional resource that you can use to help you write your plan is this DMP checklist, where you can find all the elements that should be addressed in your plan. This should allow your approach to data management to be pretty, generic and standard for any project. So this checklist doesn't pertain to any template or funding agency. It's pretty general for any data management plan. One important section of your plan will be to ensure that members of your research team understand their roles and responsibilities related to managing data and materials. So this plan outlines the specific data management practices that you will use throughout the course of your project. An important part to beginning a project is to set up standard operating procedures for data management. And to help you establish procedures, we have created checklists that outline the important steps for onboarding new team members about data management practices. So while the principles are general, these documents do focus on Harvard policies and resources. So we have two versions. The comprehensive version is, serves as a general research data management focused guide to employee and training onboarding as they join a new lab or even a new project. This longer version is provided as kind of this initial introduction to all of the processes and just the breadth of available resources. You should really use this version first, and then you could use the abridged version, which serves as more condensed version of the comprehensive checklist. You can use this version as your actionable checklist after you've looked through the comprehensive version. So these documents really should be accessible to all your team members to ensure that everyone is following the practices and the procedures that you've agreed upon. So our next stage is collect and create. So while in this stage you will be concerned with, collecting and creating and working with your data, you also need to think about how you're going to name files, organize things, how they'll be tracked and documented. So as I mentioned, we have a checklist that you can use to follow the principles for creating file naming conventions. This worksheet has some templates you can follow and both some good and poor examples of file names to get you on track. Using these checklists, you should think about the groups of files that you may need to name, such as maybe project-related files, data sets, or individual data files. You may need to apply a few naming conventions for different parts of the project. So follow the checklist for each group of files and document those conventions in your group or your lab's protocols to ensure that everyone is following the standard conventions that you create. Similar to file names, setting up your directory structure is also important. So I suggest doing this before the project starts and before you start collecting data so that you have the structure set up, ready to go. Save your data in the correct place as you're working and creating it, and then modify the structure as your data grows, and maybe you refine your workflows. So here, this checklist can be used to follow the top 5 practices for organizing your project files. And this worksheet also has a very generic example of how folders could be organized. Remember, we want that nice hierarchical structure to our files, folders, and directories. Finally, for maintaining documentation of our files, data sets, and projects, it's crucial that you are documenting information about those files and your projects. This is crucial that your data can be correctly interpreted by yourself and by others. So README files provide a clear and concise description of all relevant details about data collection, data processing, and data analysis. You may create one document. You may create a README file to document changes to your files or file names within a folder. You may create a README to explain file naming conventions or practices in general for future reference. Or you may create a README file to specifically accompany files or data that's uploaded to a repository. So this checklist covers 6 questions, really the who, what, when, where, and why of your data that you should consider for creating really good, consistent documentation files. Moving right along to the analyzing and collaborating stage, we want you, to standardize procedures for documenting project steps, procedures, and workflows. For example, you can use lab notebooks, either paper, electronic, protocols, and file sharing platforms. 2 other really good practices I just want to highlight here are you should always keep a raw copy of your data and to ensure that you are working with tidy data for your analysis. So one widely used file sharing platform is Dropbox. Dropbox is a great platform to help you manage projects and provide sharing and access to files and documents. But remember, no matter what platform you use, maybe it's another kind of cloud sharing platform like Box or Drive or OneDrive, SharePoint, the best practices for data management remain the same. So you can use this Dropbox checklist and make it available to the whole team to successfully use Dropbox. Dropbox is vetted by Harvard, so depending on where you are in the institution, you can get access to Dropbox for business. All right, so while not, a developed checklist as we've been kind of looking at, we do have some steps for successfully working with your data. So ideally, we want our data to be collected and set up in a way that allows us to go right from data collection to data analysis. Data analysis ready data sets have been responsibly collected and reviewed so that analysis of data yields clear, consistent, and error-free results to the greatest extent possible. When working on a research project, you should take steps to ensure that your data is safe, authentic, and usable. However, we know that this is not always the case. We're often, working with some messy data, but we can be proactive as best we can. So this page on our website outlines some steps for preparing analysis-ready data sets. So that looks at some steps such as working with, tabular and 2-dimensional data when you're creating it, formatting your data using tidy data principles, reviewing and validating your data, establishing consistency and standard, data entry standards and protocols. Maybe you need to take some steps to clean your data to make it easier to work with. And then, of course, all of those steps must be documented to ensure that you're collecting data set metadata. All right, so each stage of the data lifecycle revolves around the management of data storage. I'm missing my data storage image here, but recall that's why we saw store and manage at the center of our lifecycle image. That's because data storage, data security, data safety, they apply to all of our lifecycle stages. So you need to be thinking about data storage at every point along the way. So as I just mentioned, proper storage maintenance throughout the lifecycle is imperative. And this includes backing up your data. So the basic storage strategy for backing up your data is this 3-2-1 rule. I don't have a checklist for you, but the 3-2-1 backup rule is an easy to remember acronym, and there are 3 easy steps for this common approach to keeping your data safe in almost any failure scenario. So this rule means that you have 3 copies of your data. 2 are geographically separate locations. Sorry, it should be 2 formats, and then 1 is in a geographically separate location. So having multiple copies reduces the risk of corruption or loss of that, master copy. And similarly, having backups in at least, one other location prevents total data loss due to a localized event, like a lab fire, a flood, or device theft. And then, of course, spreading data across multiple types of storage diffuses the risk inherent in different storage types. So here, the cartoon gives us, we have 3 copies. We have 2 formats, such as an external hard drive, 1 in the cloud, and then, of course, one of those copies is offsite away from where the research is happening. So data security, understanding what type of data you are working with is important for ensuring that you are securely handling and storing your data. So we're looking at the Harvard University data security levels, ranging from level 1, which is public data, to level 5, highly sensitive data, which includes specific requirements for proper use. For any proposal at Harvard, a security officer will be assigned to review the security level of your data, but you, the researcher, as the data steward, should understand the data that you will be working with. So this Harvard Catalyst data privacy and security checklist can help you think about your research and prepare an IRB application. So next, towards the end of your project, you will need to evaluate your data and determine what will be retained, shared, or destroyed. So 2 key practices are to ensure that you determine who owns the data, and that data has been anonymized before you share anything publicly. So knowing which data and records are safe to dispose can be complicated to determine. Also, you need to ensure that you're preserving your data for X amount of time as stipulated by maybe a funder or by the institution. So one online resource to help you understand what is required is this Harvard University General Records Schedule and Research Records. So the GRS details Harvard policies on how long to retain different types of records and whether to send records to an archive or destroy them when they are no longer required. And the records retention schedule describes different types of records, explains how long they must be kept, and designate what to do with records when they have fulfilled their retention requirements. Traditionally, research records must be maintained for 7 years after a project has closed. But if you have further questions about research records, the Archives and Records Management Program, the Center for History of Medicine at Countway Library can definitely help. So you are working with sensitive or clinical data, any data with protected health information. This is typically that level 4 data. You need to ensure that you are handling that data appropriately, especially if you plan to share that data. So de-identifying data may be needed for protecting data during research or preparing data for sharing. Again, this is not a checklist, but our website does outline some steps to take before, during, and after data collection. The key practice I would like to emphasize here is preparing for anonymization of data for data sharing before data collection starts. This includes getting consent from any research participants that you do plan to share their data, their anonymized data, at the end of a project. Without that participant consent, you are not allowed to share participant data. So it's a good thing to review these steps for clinical data practice before getting started. So the last step you will come to in your research process is usually when you share or disseminate your work, either internally with collaborators or publicly. And when disseminating your work, you want to ensure that you have an ORCID, you share data in a repository, and you link to all of the other research products related to that research, like protocols and materials. So publishing your data in a repository has many benefits, including discoverability, long-term access, enhanced visibility and citation of your data, and compliance with funders and journals. And since there are many options available, I want to provide a simple flowchart that may be useful for how you can identify the right repository for publishing data. If you attended the data availability statement seminar yesterday, we did go through this flowchart, but it is a good resource for identifying the right repository for you. So you first want to start with your funder. Does your grant indicate where your data should go? For example, if you have NIH funding, your particular institute may require data be deposited in a specific place. If not, you should think about where you plan to publish your data. Does that journal have a policy? Sometimes journals have a requirement, or they may make suggestions for you. If not, see if there is a repository that is widely used and accepted in your subject area. Talk to your colleagues. Where have they shared their data? If there isn't any, consensus, or a disciplinary repository doesn't exist for your area of research, look to see if your institution has an institutional repository that supports data sharing. For example, we have Harvard Dataverse, which is an option for all Harvard researchers. And if you don't have an institutional repository, or Dataverse doesn't work for your type of data, you can identify and use a general repository like Figshare, Zenodo, or even the Open Science Framework. So along with data repositories, data citation is becoming a standard across publishers, and standardized data repositories generate a data citation when you deposit your data. Thus, sharing your data in a repository results in making your data more discoverable, reusable, citable, and trackable. So we have this checklist for how you can ensure to supply an accurate and comprehensive citation for your shared data or work. So our last life cycle stage, and related to publishing, You also want to ensure that you communicate how others can reuse your work by providing clear terms of use. The Creative Commons licensing system is most widely used for research data. Also, it's important that the data you produce should have sustainability, both in your active project work and when you leave Harvard for future opportunities. You want to ensure that you support your continued advancement as a scientist wherever you go in your professional career. So, very similarly to the onboarding checklist and the onboarding of team members, you also want to ensure you are following processes for offboarding team members and closing out projects. So, closing out a project involves kind of related to that evaluation, but identifying, preparing, and collecting all of the key research files as to identify provenance, improve future retrieval, and reduce effort when preparing, for the handoff of data or when you're ready to share your data. The closing out process enables you to revisit your project and find the most important documents as easily and quickly as possible. And then related to the project closeout is the act of offboarding team members. So we know in academia and research, there are, long-term projects that many people may be working on, and also turnover is high. So when employees leave, they take their skills and their institutional and project knowledge with them. So therefore, there should be a strategy to capture that important project information and data when people leave. So we have created checklists that outline the important steps for offboarding employees or trainees when they leave the institution. And again, while the principles are general, we have focused on Harvard policies and Harvard resources. So again, we have these two versions. Again, this comprehensive version is designed to guide this knowledge transfer process. You should definitely be reviewing the offboarding and the onboarding checklists together and to enable you to plan early in the research process for all of the kind of standard operating procedures that need to be taken throughout a project. So we have the comprehensive version, a longer version, just again points to all of the available resources. And then you could use the abridged version, which is a little more actionable, that someone could walk through at the point when they are leaving. And alongside the offboarding process is capturing all of the work that you contributed to during your time at Harvard. So the newest checklist we are still working on is to guide the documentation and the transfer of files and information. So the goal of this checklist is to ensure the smooth transition between projects and team members, and to ensure that there's transparent reporting and access to all of the institutional work. This checklist will be used to actually, document who has access to the data and lab materials that will remain in the lab when you leave. It will be used to cite where the data has been published and instruct you to convert data to, open or common file formats, and make sure that they are in a shared location so that team members are not locked out if and when you leave. Again, big draft on this one. It's still in draft form. But if you are a lab on the Longwood Medical Area campus and interested in working on something like this, please reach out to our team. The final resource I want to highlight It isn't from Harvard at all, but it's an assessment to evaluate your reproducibility practices. This assessment contains many of the practices that we've included throughout the collection of our checklists and resources that we have looked at. And this quiz from PLOS and protocols.io is a great way to see what areas you need to improve on and what data management practices you can learn more about to improve your work. So we see here that, it's prompting you, do you have a data management plan? Do you use electronic lab notebook? And it will ask you about documentation and sharing data. So it's a really great place to start and assess your project and see where you are in this reproducibility spectrum. So that includes our kind of checklist tour. While we have resources for throughout the data lifecycle, we know what we have is not comprehensive. I stated that at the beginning. We may be missing something that you are really looking for. So I'm going to pause here for just a minute to gain any feedback. Is there something related to data management that you have struggled with, that you think maybe a checklist or a similar resource would help? Great, I have some great suggestions in the chat. I think a checklist for sensitive data would help, and maybe authorship. These are great suggestions. Thank you. Great. So I do want to end with, just pointing out where you can find a lot of the information that we talked about today. So I am going to first take you to this OSF collection, Open Science Framework collection, that can help you learn more about research data management, but also has all of the nice formatted checklists that we looked at today. So I'll drop that link into the chat to this OSF page, and we'll jump over. Of course, now I've lost my page. Let me see if I can find it. Here it is. So this OSF link will bring you to something we actually ran over this last summer, which was the Great Data Cleanup Summer Campaign. And I've put all the resources together in this collection, and there are many checklists. So we can see that there are sections for all of the checklists that we reviewed in today's session. So one way you can browse all of the files here in this OSF collection. Over on the left, we see a list of all the files that have been added. So it's easily to find a checklist here. Or you could navigate using the components on the right to a specific topic that you would like to learn about. So I'll just bring you through an example of that. So if you're looking for a checklist on research data management, that's going to be that kind of overarching lifecycle checklist that we looked at. Can navigate to this page, and under files, we see this RDM checklist for the lifecycle. I've provided two versions. Two options to you, I should say. One is just a PDF that maybe you could, print out and have with, your lab documentation. There's also something I've called a form. So this is a digitally, actionable file that if you were to download and use this, you could actually, check off that you completed these steps. So something that could be, shared digitally in your shared lab or group files, and people could check off as steps are completed. You will see some versioning history happening here. You see that we're on version 5 of this. Nice thing about OSF is we've maintained some versioning. So you can see I've been working on this the last couple days. The original version we published in July last year. We can see that 19 people have downloaded this file, as well as we now have 2 people who are maybe actively downloading the newest version now. So if you joined us over the summer, I suggest taking a look at our new updated version, which has included a full look at the data lifecycle. Again, all of these checklists are CC BY, so you are more than welcome to take this and refine it as you need. Just make sure to point back to data management at the Harvard Longwood Medical Area Research Data Management Working Group. That's just one example. As you saw, we had many other checklists. So say one of your takeaways from today is you want to get started on naming your files. Great place to start if you can identify a subset of files that you want to start creating naming conventions for. You can come down to how to name a file and download the checklist for naming files and get started there. A great place to start implementing some data management practices. I'll pause here for any questions about maybe the OSF or the collection of checklists that we have available. Thank you for considering this a comprehensive collection. We're getting there. How long has it taken? It's taken some time. We've had many iterations of these checklists. We had a Lifecycle checklist developed in maybe 2017 that has kind of gone through some major updates and rethinking. With our new website that we've put out, that has allowed us to rethink, steps for data management. And these checklists, as you can see, we really debuted them over the summer, but it took, a couple months to put these together. I do want to stress that there's always room for improvement. So if you do use these resources, we would love to hear your feedback on, did it work for you? Was this an accurate, portrayal of the steps that you needed to take? What are we missing? So we can always be refining. Wonderful. The last thing I do want to point out is just where you can find all of the resources from our website. I did put this link into the chat earlier, but I'll put the direct link into the chat, but I will quickly show you how you can navigate, because it is a little buried right now, which I think we need to address as we, work with our new website. This is a new website, so we're also constantly refining this. So to find that page of resources, the best way is to, under the About page, we'll let it go. You can come to what is research data management. I'll point out a few things here so you can learn about data management. You can learn about our or the data lifecycle, explore that kind of expanded view, understand all the practices that you need to implement in data management. Here's that clinical data management guide that I mentioned with some steps on working with sensitive data, anonymization, and then steps for, I showed these for before, during, and after clinical data collection. I think this page could help us develop a more succinct checklist for working with sensitive data, as someone suggested. Here's that page for data terminology. Has a few more terms than maybe what's on our checklist for you to learn about the concepts involved. And then finally, we come to that page with RDM resources. So you can watch some recorded videos about research data management. You can find all the slides from our presentations in Dropbox. And then you can find, again, all the checklists and cheat sheets on that OSF page that we just reviewed. We've highlighted here those onboarding and offboarding checklists. Coming soon is that knowledge transfer file. And some guides that I didn't really go through today, but may be useful to you, are some tips and tools for reproducibility. And then we do have 2 guides and matrices for electronic lab notebooks, and then also a guide for choosing a repository. So I hope that helps you identify some resources to really, take your data management journey to the next step. So I will end here. I want to thank you all for joining the session on checklists today, as well as joining our Love Data Week programming. It's been really fun. The recording and the slides will be sent to you and posted on our website. I would appreciate your feedback on today's session. So please fill out the survey at the link provided.